there isn't the guarantee that in order to be competitive, like there isn't, someone can't come up to you or I and be like, hey, 5 cycles of Anavar and you will be in the top 5 at a pro show. No one can
Yeah.
say that. Someone could tell you like this amount of milligram usage, but they can't, even then they can't be like, well, this will result in your vocal pitch dropping by
Mm-hmm.
10%. If it was that easy, I still think it would be a very dicey conversation, because even then
Yeah.
it's like your view on what's feminine, your view on what you're willing to sacrifice. I mean, in a lot of ways, I do think is conditional. Not
Yeah.
you, but just globally, like people
Yeah.
when they make that decision. So it's like I have really I don't know, tried to foster um, a needs analysis that really does protect the client from potentially changing their mind down the road, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is reasonable when you see a lot of these competitors in their early 20s, mid 20s who are making decisions that are very aggressive with
Yeah.
their use. Um, so I guess like to take this into more the business side of things, like I mean, you predominantly are working with athletes like within the fitness space, some
Mm-hmm.
competitors, some non-competitors. What is the conversation like for you now with those clients around using PEDs, whether they're using them or wanting to use them for um, recreational goals or
Yeah.
competitive goals?
So I mean, I will put it out there that I don't personally feel comfortable, confident working with assisted athletes at this time. I feel comfortable and confident having the conversations needed and possibly directing them into the appropriate hands for them if they decide that that's a pathway that they want to take. When it comes to the conversation, especially from, I would say, a female perspective of like, say, sub 30, is I definitely play the devil's advocate card of like, are you really giving your all in training? Have you really reached your maximum threshold? And I share the story of like, I was 27, 28 before it was like, oh, okay, the way that I want to train now is now going to push my physique in, like, I want to be able to train more. I want to be able to train heavier. I was at the place where I was like wanting to become assisted so then I could train how I wanted to train at that point. So I was like reaching that threshold of like, literally people would look at me and be like, you are doing more harm as a natural athlete to your body because of how you desire to train. So I have those questions of like, are you really giving your all? Have you really built that base in training to where PEDs are actually going to have an assisted benefit to you, to where it can be actually beneficial and give you a little bit more support for how you want to physically train and how you get joy out of the gym. And I think a lot of people forget that the mentality has to be there. Like, this isn't it's going to give it, you're not going to be able to dick around in the gym and still see results. Like, that's not how this equation works. Like, you have to be in the gym putting forth a lot of effort before you should even have those conversations. If you're not effectively understanding drop sets, if you're not effectively understanding, how to really put a certain stress and stimulus into your training to see progress naturally, just by adding an enhancement, it's really not going to move the needle that much farther than it is going to have a negative impact on your life. So I always, play that devil's advocate card and have those tougher conversations. Like I said, that's from more of a younger perspective of a female who I do think still has a little bit more muscle maturity potential and or has more training potential. And then from the older perspective, I typically am always one to say like, hey, I think it's time. Like, I think I had the question of like, I could compete and continue to burn my candle as a natural athlete, or I can give myself a little bit more wax on that candle and a little bit more protection, even more protection for my future, and how I feel. And I, we personally, made the decision to, I personally made the decision, I shouldn't say we, I personally made the decision to never use PEDs in my off season. That was just something I personally felt like, if I'm in my off season taking care of myself and getting my health restored and back to where it needs to be, I was in the equation of like, I was too scared to know of where I would grow because I wouldn't stop the type of training I wanted to do. And so I was always a little apprehensive to do any assistance in my off season. So we used it collectively as more of a buffer of like making sure I could potentially diet on like 1200 calories versus 997. 997 is this like glaring number in my head of like, okay, we can diet at like 1297 now versus 997. And I can maintain a certain level of fullness that I personally like in my physique because I struggled with like the look that my physique would require for me to get to. I personally struggled with that. It's more so in bikini than I did in wellness, but I didn't actually like the flat stage. Like it wrecked me. And then also training to the point of that, like training in that physique, like whew, that was tough. So for me, it was more of a decision of like a little bit of gave me a little bit of a backbone of like I'd say protection, so to speak. We kind of used it more of that mechanism rather than, enhancing my physique in any way.